Okay.
I like the stash, bro.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm doing mustache march.
Nice.
I'm thinking like I'm kind of between French style or just going handlebars. So like either hipster or complete dirtbag redneck.
So you do
We'll
look
see what.
you do look like a lot of the Dodge kids we knew back at Chapman right now. You look like a lot of you look like a film production major for sure.
Well, dude, that's what I'm going back to do. You know, I mean, I actually didn't tell you. I'm going to Dodge.
Yeah.
It's so true though. Actually, yeah. What is that? Is that just the style of kind of that like I don't know subculture of I don't know because it seems like everyone did have that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the Ron Howard director's fit. Like it's just like a baseball cap, like a little scruffy, nothing crazy, a little scruffy, and then just like, 90s clothes, I guess. Like I don't know.
Right. Hey, I like it.
I'm not hating. I look a little bit Ron Howard myself.
Yeah, for like the mustache and the hair color, you got kind of the double whammy going.
Right. I could literally be Ron Howard.
Maybe you are.
Oh my God, maybe I'm his long lost son and I have millions stashed in director's money waiting for me. Yeah, I wish.
We could do some advertising with that, so
Ron Howard's son's podcast, and he's like, I don't have a son. Or what the fuck?
He's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Who?
You're like, what? All right, let me turn off this heater real quick. I forgot. It makes noise.
Okay, let me see. Creator dashboard. We should be live though. Hello everyone that's tuned in live. We're gonna get started with the recording just in a sec, so give us a little bit to get started, and then we will start the official episode of this week's Tonic Accord.
We good to go.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Okay, well then, if we're starting with immigration, then that's all you.
All right, let's do it. Let me know when you're ready to record.
All right, recording in 3, 2, 1.
I don't think it's any secret that over the last couple weeks, or maybe even last month, the crisis at the border is getting worse again. And there's kind of now a spotlight on Biden's administration. Will he be different from his predecessors, or is it more of the normal? So today, Drew and I are going to touch up on that. So, Drew, how was that Meghan Markle thing? We're going to talk about that today, right? I think we're going to spend the whole hour talking about that interview.
I bet you some people would want us to, but no, thankfully not.
That's fair. Yeah. It'd be a little bit, well, I don't know if it's actually lighter than this one, but different. I think this one is a little bit heavier. But yeah, so today, immigration. And before we get going, I kind of just, for some of our listeners, wanted to give a background really as quickly as I can, just kind of over Obama, Trump into Biden, just because I think it's important to have some context to the situation. So basically, prior to the COVID pandemic, Mexico was actually quite instrumental in helping lower immigration to the U.S. border. Trump takes all the credit, which he definitely does get some credit for the deterrence that he did. But AMLO, who's Mexico's president, he said that he was going to be a champion of the working class and a champion for immigrants. But actually, he was quite hawkish and violent towards immigrants on Mexico's southern border. And there's videos of, I think it was back in 2020, The Guardian talked about how Mexico was tear gassing Guatemalan immigrants, locking them up. So they were kind of doing what a lot of U.S. Border Patrol were doing to then the people on the southern border of the U.S. And so it was kind of between the U.S., Trump, and Mexico who kind of changed this whole system. And prior to COVID, immigration was really low because Mexico was kind of at the actual border wall, in my opinion, between Central America and the United States. And so this was kind of coupled with Trump's, what was it called? The Remain in Mexico policy, which allowed, U.S. border officers to return non-Mexican asylum seekers to dangerous places in Mexico as their claims were processed. Not great. There was a lot of issues, with family separations linked with that. And in a nutshell, this did not have a great look for humanitarian reasons. And this, although did change last March when at the onset of the pandemic, the Trump administration basically started just doing a catch and release policy under the guise of public health, where instead of detaining people, they were basically just turning away illegal border crossers and throwing them back into Mexico. And this actually incentivized them to keep trying to come back. And so then let's flash forward to now. Border crossings are up just significantly. Usually in January and February, it's a low kind of dip just because of weather and other things. But now going into 2021, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol say that there's been an average of 3,000 arrests per day along the southern border. And yeah, I just wanted to add that Biden now is kind of in an interesting place going into this because in Obama's administration, he was actually pushing to invest in Central America. but it was met with kind of mixed results because Biden was actually the stricter one of the two inside of Obama's administration. They wanted to show force at the border, and they were also kind of large deporters, and they were the ones that built the facilities that are so controversial now. And I think the criticism of the Trump administration was because his administration was centered on deterrence, scaring people from coming to the border. And he kind of squeezed it from both sides. He squeezed the process from Mexico and then made it harder for kids to be released once they were inside of the United States. And now Biden, I think, is in a tough spot because he one thing says we don't want people coming right now, but then at the same time he wants to be more humanitarian. So we're at a point where we're seeing this spike in these facilities again, and a lot of people on the more progressive left are angry. The right is angry for other reasons. So sorry, long rant there, Drew, but what do you think so far about all this stuff?
Oh, I mean, gosh, Jesus. I think that one is it's very obvious that with the shift in administration, there is a shift in tone regarding the way the United States is viewing immigration. It was no secret that the Trump administration, they explained it themselves, that it was about deterrence. It was the idea that they wanted to make it difficult for people to come and cross the U.S. border in a plethora of ways, whether that was the asylum process, having to stay in your asylum in the country you're seeking asylum from during that process, or if it was building a wall, if it was separating children from their parents at the border. It was a ploy. It was a plot to deter people from coming. They basically wanted to make it difficult to do that. I think that Biden's administration is taking a different turn. I don't think that deterrence is really their main goal. What their main goal is a little bit harder to say, though. I think they probably want what's called comprehensive immigration reform, which is kind of a giant umbrella term for various immigration policies that have been proposed for the last 20 years. And that's kind of what I do want to dig into today is what we know that the Biden administration wants to reform our immigration policy. They obviously view Trump's deterrence policy as a non-humanitarian. But what does that reform look like? And what does that mean for the United States? And how do we view immigration as a whole? It's really, really complicated. I am not even 100% confident in my own opinions on this matter. But I think in general, one is that we do have to we do have to be humanitarian in the way we deal with immigration. So first off, I do think that it's a good thing that we really look at the facilities that we were putting some of these children in, and why do we separate people for so long, and how did we lose complete knowledge of where 200 plus kids had even went at one point. So the humanitarian aspect needs to be reinstated at the very least in our immigration policy.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think this will be an interesting conversation. The one thing I'll just add to it is it kind of just a general thought is that I feel like it's going to be an issue for Biden because his administration and mainly kind of the messaging from the left is that they're being more open. I don't want to say that the left is open borders because I don't think that's true, but they definitely want to have more comprehensive and accepting immigration policy. I think as a blanket statement, that's something kind of safe to say. And so there's this general idea in Central America, mainly, places like El Salvador, Honduras, stuff like that these people are like, hey, Biden's the president now. He's not Trump. And so now we feel more like we're more welcome. And the problem is him and Jen Psaki have both said that they are actually not particularly for people coming right now. So I feel like the administration, in public image, seems to be more open towards immigration, but the day-to-day stuff might not be changing so much. It's early to tell, but I think it's going to be a bit of a conundrum for the administration going forward.
Yeah, one is just, you might be right. I imagine there are probably people that think that now that Biden is the president, that they have a way greater chance of getting in the U.S., which may not necessarily be true. So that might be one aspect. Two is it might be similar to everything else related to coronavirus. As soon as people think they have the ability to do something again, they're going to start doing it again. So maybe because, for example, if you're talking about legal immigration procedures, embassies that review visa applications were closed for months, right? So even our already slow lurching immigration process was halted and stunted for a whole year. So, whether it's legal or illegal immigration, both of which, had stalled because of the pandemic. So when those avenues open up again, there's going to be a large influx of people that might seem like a massive spike. Like I do think that perhaps Biden becoming president does shape the way people view their immigration, but I also think it might also be a part of the coronavirus seeming like it's on a tail end and people thinking that, I can move around again. So it might be a combination of those things is why we're seeing that spike. I can understand also why the Biden administration doesn't want a record spike of influx. One is in their first few months of office, that does put them in a conundrum where, it's a very, very sensitive topical wedge issue of immigration. And then two is the coronavirus spreading. It looks bad if you're letting hundreds of thousands of people in the midst of a pandemic. But the reality is you can't just halt immigration completely. Not only was that, again, humanitarian issues, but two, there's economic implications for halting seasonal workers, the normal influx of immigration. So, it's a very complicated, multifaceted issue. We should look, however, at what Biden has already done regarding immigration in his first month or so. I'm just reading here from the migrationpolicy.org that among the 17 executive actions are things signed by the president that go kind of over Congress's head, for those that don't know. Among the 17 executive actions Biden signed his first afternoon in office were the rescission of the Trump travel ban on nationals from a number of predominantly Muslim countries. This was I don't know, you remember, right? This was kind of when ISIS was at their peak, that Donald Trump decided to ban certain immigration from Muslim countries. That was rescinded. The construction on the wall was stopped. They're relooking at DACA, and then they're rolling back expansive deportation rules. So and then this one is interesting. His administration has also announced a 100-day moratorium on virtually all deportations. So a stoppage. Not forever, but for 100 days, they're just like stopping virtually all deportations from the U.S. interior, though that was stopped by a federal judge's order. And that's one that I found really interesting because I'm actually on board with pretty much everything up until that one. I'm not sure why he stopped all deportations for 100 days.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. That was the one that I actually highlighted it when you sent that part of the article. I was like, that's interesting because to me, that just seems to pave the way for another child separation situation, because already there are a lot of unaccompanied children trying to get across the border. Now, some of them may be, in a serious issue, separated from their parents. Others, there may be child trafficking. I think there's a myriad of reasons why that's happening. But to me, it says if they're trying to actually halt deportations, it just seems like it's going to create another child facility chaotic situation that no one really wants. And that's probably my one big critique, I guess, so far of the whole Biden administration's policies, are that it seems like they're less focused on deterrence, which I know deterrence under the Trump way isn't always the best, but they're let me rephrase. They're less focused on limiting the influx of people and more focused on kind of accommodating them once they've crossed the border. I'm not saying accommodating like letting them just stay here all good, but it seems like to me it could be paving a way for a lot of issues. And now I agree with the other stuff like DACA, trying to get that permanent the Muslim travel ban, which I thought was just chaotic and hard to follow. And so yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things in there, and I think that's why I think a lot of people are just really unsure what Biden's policy is, and I think both of us have kind of mentioned that too so far.
And I think a lot of and that's because immigration reform in of itself is ambiguous, kind of a massive idea. Because you and I have grown up in America in the 2000s. We've heard the phrase comprehensive immigration reform for decades, dude. Like you've heard it on news since 2002. What does that mean? I think the problem is it is too strenuous and difficult for good applicants to get in the country. Like people that want to come here, live well, right? become a member of society. So much, it's so strenuous and difficult that so many people go the route of undocumented immigration, and I think that the process needs to be easier, because I genuinely believe that immigration provides a net positive. This idea that immigrants somehow leech off of our society is that's not really found to be in the data. In fact, it's the opposite. They found that, immigration, large swaths of immigration lead to economic booms. They overall have a net good output for society, right? 50 to 75% of undocumented immigrants pay income taxes, let alone state and other taxes. This is based off of, I have it here somewhere, Bipartisan Policy Center, right? And so like the idea that immigration is somehow dragging us down, I don't see that to be true. I mean, obviously some individuals, I'm sure, but overall, immigration is a good thing for this nation, has been historically, and I think that we should really try and make it easier for people to become a member of that society. Now, it's easier said than done, but I think that comprehensive immigration reform has to look at, like, the H-1B program, which is how employers can hire, foreign nationals to work here, and it's very limited. Like, there's a plethora of things, and again, I'm no expert. But it seems to me like it's so difficult to become an American citizen, and it should be easier so that we have less people incentivized to go the illegal route.
Yeah, and the one thing I will add though is that when you and I talked about, I think it was like one of our first episodes that we did, so back in 2019 over the summer, when there was the other caravan kind of growing crisis, and I remember I wish I still had the article. I can try to find it, but like the U.S. is actually not as restrictive as I think a lot of people think.
Sure.
Like comparatively to Canada, Germany, like some of these other, I guess, more Western wealthy countries, the U.S. is actually quite, I don't want to say open, because obviously under Trump that completely just declined dramatically.
It certainly is more open than other nations like Australia
and Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
But my issue is that I think we need to focus on one thing at a time here. Like, I actually really agreed with the Obama administration's amnesty types of policies, granting legal citizenship to people that are inside of the United States already, because I think that's something that's a net gain for everyone. They're paying into the system. There's records of people. So if there is crime or health issues, whatever it may be, they're in the system. They're paying into the system. They're part of the system. And I agree with you. I don't think immigrants are always mooching off the system. I think that's just kind of an old trope that doesn't make sense anymore. My bigger issue is that the scope and size of it right now, like, on an air, and this is kind of a cheesy comparison, but it's like on an airplane, they always tell you to put on your air mask before you save your child, right? And I've always kind of had a view of immigration, especially now with the pandemic, the economy, and all these other issues. Like, I think we need to help our own people before we're focused on making immigration easier. That's just my opinion. Obviously, like, I think it could be debated, like the scope of people coming in, but it's just right now, I don't know if it's the time to expand it or make it easier.
I don't buy that argument, because one is you can't do two things at once, right? Like, it's not like our government, like the agencies involved in immigration are not also spending their time fighting the coronavirus. Those are two separate things for different agencies. So I don't see that. I don't see it like the can we do both issue as a problem. I think we can. Two is I really struggle when I hear the argument about what about our people first. Is that excuse was used even when I was working with charities to get donations for kids in other countries. People would say all the time, well, we need to help American kids first, and it's like, yeah, I mean, we do, but it doesn't. Why does there have to be a first? I think. Go ahead.
I would just say though, because I mean, I do think that there's a kernel of truth to it, especially when the countries that in Central America specifically are basically just in complete turmoil. The people are literally coming here with nothing. I understand that we need to maybe build up our asylum process more, but I don't think that we always have all the infrastructure to deal with all of this. And then again, like if you look at Obama and Trump's administration, look at what an influx happens is that we end up with these detainment centers. And obviously, I understand your point is that if we made it easier to get legal citizenship, but it's just like it's just that snowballing down the road. And like I will admit, I don't know enough on the specifics of how to do that. I am definitely not an immigration expert, but I do think that there's a feeling, especially like in the United States, that are we in the best position right now to be letting other people in? And I think we've always been kind of expected to. And I don't know. That's my theory.
I see what you're saying. I see, especially in the base of a pandemic. And I do believe that the government should reserve the right to limit immigration within reason. I don't think ever to zero, but like,
right.
I do think that perhaps in times of serious crises, that a nation state should should have the hard and soft power to limit immigration for within reason again, and within certain guidelines. So I'm not like open borders, but but again, I still want to bring back the argument that like immigration is not like fixing immigration. It will not be like a sunken cost. Fixing immigration will be a net benefit for the economy in the long run. Having a smooth, swift immigration system that allows for, like better services and economic activity will only benefit everyone. So it's not like, to me, it's not like we fixing that problem now, or like, can't we fix that problem later because we have to focus on other things now? It's like, no, fixing this problem now will help bring our economy back out of the coronavirus recession. Like it's tied in. Again, like I seriously think that you're right about these fluxes are not our fault, right? Like the idea that now we have played a hand in Central America, but like the United States, the current administration, whether it's Trump or Biden, it was not responsible for the gangs in El Salvador that are causing mass, like exoduses out of the country. That's just true. We didn't expect that, but we have to at least understand that we have to have some infrastructure for these big fluxes, and that's kind of the problem we're seeing. Is you were correct in that we don't currently have the infrastructure for these massive influxes of immigration, and we should. And I don't think that the attitude in which we deal with these influxes should be that of deterrence. It should be that of a humanitarian mindset first, but then of course you want to have national security involved. I've always thought that when dealing with immigration, you should be incredibly tough on like criminal offenders. I think that if you're an undocumented immigrant and you commit a felony in the United States, you're gone. That's it. You lost your chance. Like I don't see that there's any need for like grace in that scenario. But if you're misdemeanor level crime, drug related issues, like these are not things I don't think we should like throw away the American dream for people. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I know it's a lot. Like,
Absolutely.
We're dealing with a lot of stuff here, but I do think that like comprehensive immigration reform should not be a can we kick any farther down the road, even if it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And the olive branch I would put out to you on this one is that I think, because I'm not totally against deterrence as a general idea. I am extremely against the deterrence the Trump administration used, because like most of Trump's policies, it was very half-assed. And I think that was why we saw, grammar problems here, why we saw a big influx in these child facilities and extended child separations under him, was because the administration did not do a good job of keeping tabs. And that is something that I think shows that the administration never really actually cared too much about actually following through with how to deal with the problem. It was more just deterrence, and a bad type of deterrence that arguably violates a lot of human rights. And I think the UN Human Rights Council has actually been looking into it, as well as other organizations. But now, going into the bill right now that was sent to Congress a few weeks ago, the Us Citizenship Act, I actually like some things in it. I don't like all of it, and I don't think it's going to pass through the Senate, unfortunately, because I've seen people like Tom Cotton and even more moderate Republicans completely just against it. And they would need, as far as I know, in the Senate, they would need 10 Republicans to stop the filibuster. Mm-hmm. So probably not going to pass, but there's some cool things about it. The one for me that's actually really crucial, and it's kind of been Biden's thing, even when he was in the Obama administration, was tackling instability in Central America in the hope of, just reducing some of the flows here, trying to at least help fix the problems at their source. And Biden, back in the Obama days, was crucial in going to places like Guatemala and Honduras and meeting with leaders and trying to help with this. And so I like that. I also like that they want, to give legal status to up to, I think it was 11 million undocumented migrants. That's better for everyone, right? Because we have not only just tabs on American citizens, but we also have them paying in, and we can help them or kick them out if we need to. And then also, there's and actually one of the things you were talking about too is immigration courts. He wants to put more resources into immigration courts, because I definitely agree with you on that one, because one of the big problems during the Trump era and even parts of the Obama era was that, say you had someone from El Salvador get caught crossing the border into the U.S., all of a sudden they're not just sent back to El Salvador, they're just sent to Mexico to wait until their case is brought up in the U.S. courts. And what happens to that person in that period? It could be months, maybe even years. And that's a serious problem. So, I mean, I can agree to disagree with you on maybe the metaphysical ideas of immigration in the United States, but I would agree with you that it's here and we need to fix it.
Certainly, the court issue, the backlog. I think there was a John Oliver episode one time about the backlog of these immigration cases is ridiculous. One guy was like, "Oh, like here's your immigration case. Like you need to appear before court in 2025 to just like begin the process of the next, court date." And you're like, "Holy cow!" Right? So obviously, and that should not be the norm, right? That should not be the norm, regardless of immigration status or why you're there or whatever. Whether or not they say yes or no, it should be done a lot swifter than years and years down the line. So yes, absolutely, we should, at the very least, fund these courts and the systems in place to at least chug along the process quicker than it is. Yeah, I'm reading the White House. Obviously whitehouse.gov, right? This is the White House talking about their own bill, so it's going to make it look really good. So obviously, grain of salt. Yeah. But it does seem like, they want to keep the families together, right? Obviously, a big campaign thing from Biden for the whole, in his election. But crackdown on criminal organizations, enhances the ability to prosecute individuals involved in smuggling and trafficking networks, especially exportation of migrants. I think that 100%. Crack down on coyotes, crack down on human traffickers, 100%. I'm all for that. I think if you balance out allowing people that want to better their lives, make that easier for them to do, and then crack down on those that want to abuse our system. Now, easier said than done, obviously, but if you make that the kind of the balance and the goal, I think that would be kind of a bipartisan way to do it. Definitely
agreed. No, and I also remember hearing, I think it was on a podcast, so it's a little vague, the details, but they were talking about how, I think it was under the Trump administration and prior during the Bush years as well, that some of these people that were deported were like some of these like huge criminals were deported and were actually involved in kind of bringing back MS-13 and these other groups to Central America. So that's also a problem, is that they never faced accountability in the United States. So then all of a sudden they're going back and causing more issues in their own country too. So no, it's a completely broken process. And I don't think we can keep going back and forth pendulum shift every 4 years. You know what I mean? It's just something that's not sustainable. And I think that's actually probably part of the reason why we're seeing the issue now with the border crisis,
I think that's a really good point. Also, real quick, Code Dancer, thank you for the follow. I want to just read his comment too. I think it's too easy to blame the U.S. for all the problems in Central America, Africa, or the South Pacific. It's much less palpable to say that local corruption and cultural differences are in part responsible for the problems in those places face. Certainly there is no one catalyst for all the world's problems, right? So to say the U.S. is responsible for everything bad, it would be, ridiculous statement. So I agree with you there. Look, certainly El Salvador is locally, El Salvador, its infrastructure is crumbling. On Honduras, right? Corruption is rampant. Even within Mexico, cartel corruption is rampant. How do you reduce that kind of? How do you reduce that on its populations from afar as a foreign entity is hard. The United States, anytime the United States wants to get involved in something like that, it raises a lot of eyebrows, for better or worse. So I'm not exactly sure how you would go about that, but humanitarian aid to El Salvador, Guatemala, political pressure to reform, but again, easier said than done when you're dealing with United States putting its fingers in other people's business. But I certainly agree with you, Code Dancer, that not all of this immigration influx is the U.S.'s fault, but it's certainly a problem that is on our doorstep. And I think that Alex just brought up a great point, which was the fact that our administrations do change every 4 to 8 years can lead to this ebb and flow of immigration law that people will find it's almost like this all this like stock talk these days of like buy the dip. This is almost like the dip in the immigration seriousness, right? Like, buy the dip. Biden got in. It might be a little bit lenient for a couple of years, so buy the dip. I don't know. It's a weird analogy. I'm not trying to make it like a stock thing, but I'm just trying to give an idea of like, I can see how there's opportunists that see maybe a more lenient administration. And that's an issue that America has designed into itself, baked into our politics for almost everything, is that administrations change and our promises shift.
Yeah. And the one thing I would just say to Code Dancer, just because that got me thinking, is you're right. We can't blame the U.S. for everything, but we can blame systems. And for me, it's always just been that the West found a lot of resources, and they found guns and they found boats, and they were able to exploit people for their resources, and they used force to do so. And those residual effects are still out there,
Certainly.
especially in places like Africa and Latin America. And so I don't think you can just separate the two easily. That's all. I'm going to leave it there because that's a whole other topic. But yeah, but Drew, I think you're right. And I mean, yeah, I think we see it with everything. Foreign policy. There was obviously a difference between when Bush was president and Obama. We saw like Russia try to take advantage of Obama. Like this stuff happens all the time in a myriad of different topics, right? But I just think that I hope that the Biden administration can actually pass legislature, not just executive orders, because as we know, those can just keep overturning every 4 to 8 years, and that's a problem. The one thing I did want to ask you about, which is also in the Biden bill, really quickly, is Trump's executive order that sought to punish sanctuary cities. What do you think we do with that whole concept of sanctuary cities?
Well, again, this is like the concept of sanctuary city to me is evidence of I don't know, maybe some of the failures of our federalist system a little bit. Like in my opinion, like I was even going to mention this was because I see California. I mean, live in California, I see this all the time. Whereas they'll make undocumented immigrants get access to government services that citizens also get. And while I believe that those individuals should get those services, I just believe that they should be absorbed into society as like with a legal status to then get those services. Like the problem is on the federal level. On the federal level, we're not letting a lot of people become citizens quick enough or easy enough, or just there's so many, right? For the plethora of issues we've talked about, there's a lot of people that want to become citizens that aren't. And the federal government is preventing that. And so states like California that view themselves as very progressive will, in their view, make up the difference by then providing undocumented immigrants the ability to have driver's licenses, the ability to vote in school boards, the ability to apply for Medicaid, right? To make up the difference. And then and the sanctuary city is a part of that. I think that it's putting a Band-Aid on the wound, where in reality I think we should just make the system in and of itself better to have these people get those services without having individual states kind of circumvent the federal government. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, I think that was really well said. Yeah, like I think it does show just how like fractured and divided our country is on like just a range of issues. I mean, it's kind of a loose comparison, but I mean, think about the lifting of mask mandates, and I think it's like 13 states now. It's kind of a similar thing where the federal government says one thing, and some certain states are like, yeah, but we're gonna either make up or maybe not make up for whatever this rule is. So I agree with you, and actually that's a really good point, that it does seem to show issues with our federal immigration system. Now, I mean, I think that also unfortunately just fuels the somewhat culture war, but that's a whole other topic again. Yeah, I don't know if do you have any more thoughts on this one, or do you think that should wrap it up for today on the lovely topic of immigration?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean, again, this is one of those topics that you literally could have an entire podcast, and I think there are whole YouTube channels dedicated to immigration law and all that. So if you're if you're definitely interested in that topic, go for it and go forth and research. But certainly, I think that this issue will not go anywhere. It's going to come back around time and time again. I'm interested to see how far the Biden administration is willing to go with what they view as comprehensive immigration reform. I think that the conversations around immigration have certainly changed with the Trump administration. So the language we use around like separating families and stuff like that, the humanitarian aspect is kind of on the forefront. I think that's a good thing. That humanitarianism is like that conversation of bringing that humanity back to our immigration is important. But there's a lot of other aspects we need to look at as well, of course. So this issue is not going anywhere. It's been here for decades. It's just kind of where the immigration is coming from is shifting, and that's kind of interesting as well. I have nothing else to add right now. Obviously, we can only scratch the surface so much with our time on these topics. So definitely, if you're out there listening and we found this interesting, look into it yourself.
Absolutely. And yeah, take care as always. And as usual, you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, here on Twitch. Usually once a week we stream. Let us know what you think. Do you have any ideas for people we should bring on? Are you a political expert? Let us know. And take care, and we'll be back with another episode later. Thanks.
Okay, and so for those watching live, don't go anywhere. That was just finishing recording the first episode. We're going to actually just go right into our second episode. We do both episodes live, and then we actually segment them out when we put them on YouTube. So, yeah, that was dope. Intense topic. Now we're going to get into something even less lighthearted, but I think equally as important, especially on the global stage, which is talking about the civil war in Yemen and that humanitarian crisis going on over there. I know a lot of heavy topics. Not everything we do here at the Tonic Accord is this heavy, guys. If you're watching live right now, last week we had a comedian on talking about his opinions on culture and cancel culture and stuff like that. We'll do some fun stuff, like talk about our favorite political gaffes. But this week in particular just happens to be a little bit heavier, but equally as important. So I don't know if you want to. Are we good to just kind of go right into it, Alex? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm good to go because I got that snow's looking scary. So yeah, I should probably
going
keep
soon.
This moving.
Yeah. You are correct. Okay, so let's get right into it. And then I'll start recording in a second. Let me just kind of get my thoughts.
Sounds good.
Get my ducks in order here.
I was thinking that the post-Trump era is probably going to be good for you and I because I think we agreed on everything in the Trump era, and now we might see more of our ideological differences come out.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, you're not wrong. Like, I think, well, when you have a more balanced and nuanced political discussion around policy. Like we have more balanced and nuanced opinions, right? But when we have something like so crazy as like, is it bad that Trump is tweeting to blow up North Korea? Like, of course, you and I are both like, yeah, it's terrible. But now it is right. It's like now you have like, okay, we're back to normalcy where we can kind of dig into the gritty and find out where you and I disagree more often. And I love that. I love that. That's a good point. Okay, let's get right into this. Whew. Recording in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord, and hello, everyone continuing to watch you live tonight. We're going to be talking about something that's pretty heavy but incredibly important. It is the war in Yemen. This is actually what the UN calls the single greatest humanitarian crisis facing the globe today, and that's significant given we're kind of still in a pandemic. So we're going to be looking at what is going on in Yemen, who are the players in this international crisis, and kind of the history behind that, and how, perhaps from an American perspective, the Biden administration will deal with its policy regarding Yemen going forward. So this is a pretty tough tough pill to swallow, but I want to give a little bit of context for those watching. The civil war in Yemen started around 2014, 2015, kind of following the failure of the Arab Spring to bring real institutional changes. A president was ousted. His name was Ali Abdullah Saleh. He was the president of Yemen, and he was ousted by the Arab Spring revolt, but then a new government was put in backed by a Saudi-led coalition, which didn't really change the elites in charge, which led to a rebel group called the Houthis fighting against the Yemeni government. So contained within Yemen, you have a civil war between the Houthi rebels and the established Yemeni government. The Houthi rebels actually hold control of the capital of Yemen. The real problem is larger than this, larger context around Yemen, which is the Houthi rebels are supported by Iran. The Yemeni government is supported by Saudi Arabia and a few other Arab coalition allies. And this has led to a proxy war, which has lasted 5 to 6 years now, has resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, the displacement of millions of innocent lives, and as well as you're now looking at a famine that is putting somewhere between 11 and to 17 million people in hunger. So a serious humanitarian crisis, and I think it's one that I think a lot of people don't even realize is happening. So we wanted to definitely get into it today. Alex, it's been going on since 2015. What have you heard about the war in Yemen from, media and mainstream news sources in the last 5 years?
Well, I mean, I've heard it's the biggest disaster that no one's talking about. It's completely despicable and sad. And I think my biggest takeaway from that Al Jazeera video that both of us watched that kind of highlighted the background was when they talked about basically humanitarian aid has become a political weapon. They were talking about how the Houthis and the Yemeni government that's backed by the Gulf States coalition, both sides are blocking humanitarian aid to the people who need it. So this is not like there's one good side and one bad side. This is not black and white. It's kind of just pure evil and religious division and sectarianism gone rampant. And I don't think this crisis stops until we kind of face the main culprits, which are Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S.'s sad relationship where we're kind of in bed with the Saudis. And to me, it seems that both countries, especially Iran and Saudi Arabia, just have growing ambitions in the area. And I think it's just going to get worse, unfortunately, before it gets better.
Yeah. That seems to be a common theme in international relations, which is if you find me a small civil war and I will tell you who's really at play, right? It's almost like, this happens all the time. I mean, Vietnam, Korea, right? These major wars that we look at through history are viewed through the lens of larger powers, larger regional or at times global powers vying in a proxy war. They are less analyzed in the realm of the individual, like the person in Yemen who, may not be a Houthi rebel or a Yemeni government supporter and simply wants to live a normal life, right? But the reality is these wars are driven, more often than not, are driven by larger foreign powers. And so the one here is, like we just mentioned a little bit, you have the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and among the other, oil emirates, I guess you could call it, that are in this Gulf region. They want to maintain control over Yemen. And I believe I always get them confused, but Saudi is Shiite, right? Or am I getting that wrong? I always flip them. I know it's Sunni and Shiite, and I know that one is with Iran and one is with Saudi, but
So the Houthis are with Iran, and I think Iran's Shia. Yeah. Okay. Iran Shia. So the Houthis are the Shia rebels. So I think Saudi Arabia is Sunni.
Sunni, right? So you have a Sunni-backed, Gulf nations backing the Yemeni government to make sure that it's Sunni, that it's also willing to play ball with whatever these oil boys want. That was one of the main reasons right after the failed Arab Spring. The reason we say it was a failed Arab Spring is because whatever person was ousted by these revolts, usually and pretty much 9.9 times out of 10, they was replaced with other elites, other religious figures or banking elites, right? Like not really much of the people felt a structural institutional change. And Saudi Arabia is the reason that there was not any structural change in Yemen after their Arab Spring. Saudi Arabia replaced it with pro-Saudi elites, and that's kind of been the norm in the Yemeni government. Whereas Iran, which is a non-Arab Shia Muslim nation, is also vying for power in the region, has backed the Houthi rebels, which are Shia Muslims as well, and now will support them with guns and weapons and missiles. to support their war. And so if you look at like, outside of Yemen, it's who's vying for political power in the region. And you had a great article about that, so I definitely want to throw it back to you. Tell us a little bit about who are the big boys in the region that are like, why is Yemen so important to Iran, Saudi Arabia, and perhaps others like Turkey?
Yeah, that's a great segue, because my next point was to be that I actually think the Trump administration did a good job of one thing in the Middle East. They helped Israel establish relationships with some of those oil Gulf countries like Bahrain and the UAE. I think the Abraham Accords were actually probably Trump's biggest foreign policy success. But the problem is that we were so focused on these agreements, which were actually pretty likely because they're all kind of wealthy, more secular countries. But the problem is the Trump administration, and I would probably argue the Obama administration as well, kind of turned a blind eye to some growing, more nefarious actors in the region. That foreign policy article you mentioned, I think, is really good because it talks about how prior to this, the last several decades of Middle East foreign policy, conflict, politics have all kind of centered around chaos and conflict with a lot of the Arab actors, between Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, just to name a few, Saudi Arabia. But now it seems like there's a power shift where some of the biggest actors are some of these non-Arab actors like Turkey, Israel, and Iran. And that foreign policy article talks about that, is how we're seeing Turkey, Iran, and Israel now are starting to try to see what they can get away with in the area. And this puts me to a kind of a more philosophical question, which I'll maybe turn back to you on this, is that, we did an episode last year about Thucydides' trap and the U.S. and China. And I was thinking today when I was out on a ski, I was like, could Saudi Arabia and Iran be the next Thucydides trap, where you have Saudi Arabia is getting desperate because they see this growing Iran? And for people who don't know, Thucydides trap is just this idea of kind of a waning superpower sees a rising superpower, and they're kind of forced to go to conflict because the balance of power in the region or world changes. And I just wonder, Drew, do you think maybe we could be seeing that happening here, and Yemen's just the battlefront for it?
I think it's absolutely happening. I think that's exactly what's going on. Is Yemen is the chessboard, is the and like you said, Thucydides trap, which is again a great episode for those watching. Check out our episode on that political concept. The idea that I think Saudi Arabia does not want Iran to overpass its regional power, and vice versa, and then both of them don't want Turkey and Israel to overshadow their regional power. But they all kind of need to be in bed with each other a little bit. Maybe not Iran and Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia's already, gotten in bed with Israel and Turkey a little bit so that they could gain their own power. It's this complex of, web of, these guys all want to be the top dog, but they kind of need each other a little bit to get ahead. And then, of course, you have even non-Middle Eastern states like Russia, China, and the United States all being players, kind of farther away players in this as well. Let's dive into how the United States has been involved with some of these major players. So, Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is one of those countries where I think like every political spectrum like every American political spectrum at some point hates Saudi Arabia. Like if you find the progressive leftists, they're gonna hate Saudi Arabia for the women's rights things, the Khashoggi killing, right? But then you're also gonna find like I even find the most like gun-toting, truck-driving Republicans. They're just like they hate Saudi Arabia as well, because giving money to the Saudis, like those backwards ass people. And so it's funny to me how in bed America is with the Saudis, despite how I think publicly, like I bet you if you took a public opinion poll about people, do you want to be allied with Saudi Arabia? I bet you a vast majority of Americans would say no. But the reality is, since 2015, arms deals to Saudi Arabia, and they've been going on longer than that, but arms deals to Saudi Arabia since 2015 were found to be linked to Saudi bombings in Yemen. And because the United States has a, partnership with Saudi Arabia, and we definitely don't want Iran to gain any power, we decided to help Saudis and provide them with arms to bomb the Houthi rebels. That was at least the idea. So the problem is we give them bombs, we give them missiles and weaponry to defend, to attack the Houthi rebels, but then the problem is Saudi Arabia uses them against civilians. So this is where these thousands and thousands of civilian deaths have come into play, where Saudi Arabia had bombed, allegedly, and I think it's true, they have bombed hospitals, children's schools, education centers in Yemen, with the notion that these were Houthi rebel sites or Houthi military operations, and in reality they were not. And so I just want to say here, Steve Pomper, who was a former senior State Department official for President Obama, said, look, people make miscalculations all the time. But it was striking to me as I reflected on my time in the Obama administration that it wasn't just that we embarked in this escapade, it's that we didn't pull ourselves out of it. So so we obviously got involved. We understood what we were doing was giving arms and weapons to Saudi Arabia that was using it to bomb civilians in Yemen, and we didn't stop. And that's a blight on Obama's administration, and it's certainly a blight on Trump's. Trump was gung-ho in giving Saudi Arabia more arms weapons. He even said, I want Boeing and Raytheon to sell to the Saudis. We want to create jobs, and that was his excuse, was job creation. But what was happening was these bombs were eventually reaching, killing children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing on Obama's administration in that, I feel like if there was a serious issue with Obama's foreign policy, it was that he was a little bit too idealistic at times, I think. I think that he was never very willing to stick to a red line if it's crossed, or to stand up sometimes against allies or for allies. And I think it's because he thought like he wanted to be pragmatic. And unfortunately, a lot of these more nefarious actors are not trying to work with us for the best interests of both parties. And I would just say on Biden, though, Biden was the more hawkish of the two.
Yeah.
And so maybe the silver lining here is that the Biden administration will put a stronger stance towards some of these things. But I think you're right and very accurate on the fact that this is not an old problem with Saudi Arabia. I think I said this last week, but Trump just did it all more in the open. He made it so transactional, and he was willing to just say all the bullshit, that I think it even put a more negative light about Saudi Arabia to a lot of people. And then the Khashoggi killing, I think, which was back in October of 2019, or maybe even further back, I think that was to a lot of Americans and to a lot of the world kind of just the symbol of what Saudi Arabia stands for.
Yeah.
This was a guy who was in Turkey trying to meet his future wife, and they literally cut him up and dissolve his body in a Saudi embassy in Turkey. I'm curious why the Turkish government didn't do more about it too, but that's a whole other thing. But I think that unfortunately we're in such a weird relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's like, yes, we would lose jobs, but eventually you do have to pull off the Band-Aid, because it seems like MBS doesn't just want to be our trading buddy anymore. He wants to see how much he can get away with in the region, and it seems like it's getting worse and worse, and that's going to mean not just innocent civilian lives of Middle Eastern countries, but that's also going to mean American lives potentially.
Absolutely. I don't think MBS gives a rat's ass about American lives. It's all scratch my back, I scratch your, it's business, right? Also, real quick, what's the flag? I know you have the Spanish flag. Some people in the chat are wondering about the flags you have in your room. What do you see? I know you have Spain. What's the other ones?
Yeah, I was going to wait to answer that, but so the Spanish flag, I worked there. I had all my students sign it back in the day, so that's that. I have a Czech flag because I'm half Czech, and then I'm a quarter Polish, so I have a Polish flag there as well. I used to have an American flag, but it fell down and is currently out of service. So there's that question. And also, Stoic CVV, you are correct. That's why the Turks couldn't, investigate that further on Saudi soil. But they also could have potentially worked with intelligence to stop the Saudis from fleeing the country. Potentially, there's that as well.
So what were we saying? Okay, so yeah, MBS. I think at a certain point, it's like, you're right. Not just a couple of jobs. Billions and billions of dollars in industry, right? Defense contracts, oil contracts. Big capital B billions of dollars of flow of cash in and out of Saudi Arabia, thanks to the United States. That is why. So if anyone's asking, why are we still in bed with this asshole? That's why. And so it's, it shows that the pull, the attraction of and the stickiness of these deals is goes through administrations. I mean, whether you have a left-leaning president or a war hawk conservative, everyone's in bed with Saudi Arabia. So I do hope that, I don't think it will be Biden. I mean, maybe. I hope I'm surprised. But you're right that he's kind of still the war hawkish of the Obama administration. He's already started drone striking Iranian targets in Syria, right? So, like, I don't think this will change anytime soon. But if anyone is wondering why we are in bed with this bastard, it's because of billions and billions of dollars of contracts with Boeing and Raytheon and defense contracts, as well as oil. It's pretty much how it is. I mean, unfortunately, it is that simple.
Right. Because, I mean, it is true that, like we have a comment here who says that the U.S. is worse than MBS. Stop sitting here talking about it. I would push back just mainly for the cultural aspects as well. I mean, there are still death sentences for people that don't seem to fit the line of the Saudi government's religious values. Women just were allowed to drive, I think, 2 years ago now. Gay people, you would probably not want to be gay in Saudi Arabia. So I would step back and say, you're right. Israel has issues themselves, 100%. But Israel has, I mean, I'm not even going to get into Israel right now. That is
Yeah,
just
dude.
whole...
I mean, look, you're coming and asking if us we're pro-Israel. I mean, like, that's a separate topic, and we have had expressed our opinions on the Israel-Palestine conflict. If you are really interested, you can look those up because now we're racist. You don't like Arabs. Okay, so Here's the thing, man, is we're just discussing the foreign policy, the United States foreign policy towards Saudi Arabia and how we disagree with it. We think that Saudi Arabia is engaged in humanitarian crisis in Yemen. You can disagree with that, but I really don't see where you're getting the racism part from. Anyway, we're going to move on. I think that's the main problem is the United States, time and time again, has decided that, we are willing to overlook humanitarian issues if it's beneficial for our policy goals in the long run. And that has caused us to get into scenarios where we kind of have our hands tied. And this is one of those scenarios. So ideally, we should have never gotten business with the Saudis in the first place. But since we're here, I do think perhaps looking at avenues for energy independence any way we can to get away from Saudi Arabia is a good thing. I do think that, stopping these defense contracts as much as we can or limiting them as much as we can to prevent U.S. military equipment used in Yemen should happen. But how that happens is really hard to say because, again, we talked about just recently because of the Khashoggi report that, Biden administration wants to stop some of the aid to Saudi Arabia for offensive measures. But that doesn't mean we're stopping any of our deals for defensive measures. And all Saudi Arabia has to do is say, well, there's a Houthi rebel. They were planning to bomb us, so we bombed them first. That was defensive, right? A preemptive defensive strike. So even Biden's half-assed attempts at trying to curb Saudi Arabia's power, I still am critical of.
Yeah, definitely. And now this is interesting. What do you think about this? So I saw that the U.S. just removed the Houthis from being designated as a foreign terrorist group.
Real quick, I gotta ban this guy because he's.
Oh yeah.
Now you're threatening violence, man. Hey, listen, man. You're welcome to disagree with us, but if you're gonna say you're gonna beat us up, that you're gonna get banned. Like I don't know what else to tell you. I don't know what you expected. I'd fuck you up, white boy. Okay, dude.
Oh, this is nice. Okay.
Well, you have a good day, bro. Find a different stream. Okay. So anyway, back to the real conversation at hand. What were you saying about about Biden's attacks?
Yeah, so they removed the Houthi rebels as a terrorist group. So
Right.
Do you think, like, in my opinion, that could be a first step of at least not alienating them, where maybe a conversation could be reached, maybe not in the present, but down the road? You know what I mean?
I think it does a little. I mean, it's symbolic. Like again, I think it's to get the headline. Like hey, like the Houthis are not a terrorist group. It's symbolic, but I don't think Saudi Arabia will change their decision making based on America's categorization of the Houthis. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're probably right. And there's a guy, Jonathan Schanzer, who is a foreign policy expert, and he wrote in MSNBC's article on this. He was basically saying that, unfortunately, it seems like no matter what the Biden administration does right now, there's probably not a good option. Like, we don't really want to escalate tensions because, obviously, as we've talked about, that's what we've kind of helped do indirectly, and that's not helping. And I don't think pulling out either is the option. So it kind of seems like this is one of those issues where I know it sounds cliche and simple, but it needs to be done from the inside. And like my biggest thing is there was a number here. Let me see if I can find it. I know I wrote it down. It was basically talking about The Economist said the U.S. spends as much on Egypt's armed forces as it does on aid to the entire region. And the economists argue that since George W. Bush, the main problem is we just keep giving aid packages to these leaders in these countries. Yeah. And all it's doing is just giving them more power, giving them more facilities for violence, and it's not instituting real change. And so, again, like I think the U.S. from day one has been too involved in this area, and it's just gotten worse to the point where the money we're putting into these countries is just helping the bad guys in these countries. So, like, obviously pulling out's not going to help either. So I don't know where we go from here. And that's just my honest thoughts on it.
Yeah. Like, so for example, like one is there is a Saudi backed blockade, preventing, aid and the flow of goods and services in and out of Yemen. I think that like without like complete, like, I mean, again, if you're having to, I'm coming at this from like if I was Joe Biden and I had a lot of my hands tied, perhaps you can't just cancel a $2 billion Raytheon contract, but what you can do is, I don't know, like try and persuade Saudi Arabia to perhaps they'll get more contracts in the future if they get rid of the blockade. Like at least get rid of the blockade, right? Like I see that as a major issue preventing the goods and services and the flow of like medical supplies for the coronavirus. Like the flow of just objects and services needs to go back into Yemen so that people can just live and survive this pandemic and the war. On top of that, I think that utilizing maybe leverage with the Abrahamic Accord with some of with Israel, because the United States has a good alliance with Israel for better or worse, leveraging that alliance against Saudi Arabia to try and just put political pressure to ease tensions in Yemen. Like it will, unfortunately, might have to be like baby steps and stuff. I just don't see a world in which the United States just cuts ties with Saudi Arabia overnight. I don't see that happening. So I'm just trying to think of real solutions. But certainly the biggest problem right now is just the blockade preventing humanitarian aid. Now, another problem you just mentioned is if you can get humanitarian aid in, who does it go to? Does it go to the Yemeni? Does it go to the Yemeni government? They're not going to give it to people in the Houthi neighborhoods. Does it go to the Houthis? How do you ensure a rebel group appropriately distributes humanitarian aid? So I don't know. It's super complex. But now what we're seeing is, immigration issues because Yemeni people are being displaced in the tens of millions. So they're going to places like Israel and Saudi Arabia and Oman and others.
Yeah. So again, I mean, it's such a complicated issue. Is that maybe the more broad, maybe just kind of one of my concluding thoughts here could be that I think the problem is that we're using 20th century models to deal with escalating, diversifying problem that is completely, in some ways, unprecedented. You know what I mean? Like maybe, and obviously I don't have this. This is just kind of a rhetorical question to our listeners, to you, to whoever is. Maybe it's time that we re-examine our approach. We re-examine what it means to support different sectarian groups in the region. Maybe we look at the difference of what some of these new actors are doing, or not new actors, but new actors having power, like Turkey, Israel. Like, there's just so many moving pieces that maybe the paradigm shift is coming. Maybe this is how it begins, is all these growing conflicts and new actors. I don't know, man.
Hey, maybe maybe you do some old school CIA tactics and just like assassinate MVS, put in one of your guys, and hope he doesn't go crazy as well.
I mean, it arguably has worked better than some of these current processes.
I mean, I'm kidding, of course. But yeah. I really, it's disheartening though. I mean, this is one of those topics that is so tough to talk about because it's not easy to find a solution. But there's obviously a problem, and it's one of those things that is, again, just coming from my American perspective. So for an American audience, a lot of people don't know what the hell's going on in Yemen. A lot of people really don't understand that there's one of the largest humanitarian crises in decades happening in Yemen. I mean, people hear about in the past of things like Darfur and stuff like that. Like, this is ours. This is our Darfur. is millions and millions of people being famished in Yemen because of this war, and it's not even because of. It's because it's a proxy war between two other regional giants. So it obviously shows the complexity of international relations and how much we do need to be attuned to some of these regional players. And it also shows that our media perhaps doesn't cover certain things as much as they should.
Well, I mean, as we've seen with more domestic stuff lately in the U.S., the media covers what they want to cover, and I think for a myriad of reasons they don't want to cover this. I mean, I could understand why they maybe don't. It's a huge blemish on pretty much everyone involved. But again, yeah, like I think it's important to shine light on this, and I do worry that this region is going to just get hotter and hotter because Turkey's involved in everywhere from Syria to Armenia now, Iraq, Libya. And Russia's kind of linked with Turkey everywhere. It's just, I think it's going to get quite hot and bad. And so at least I think we have a president and an administration that are having these conversations and are trying to do something about it. And at this point, that's all I can really say. But I hope that's at least a step,
Yeah, I just hope that, I just see a lot of signaling from Biden that he wants to be tougher on Saudi Arabia. But signaling is air. You know what I mean? Again, like you said, Joe Biden has a history of being the more hawkish Democrat in the Obama administration. So, signal all you want, but let's put your money where your mouth is, and I'm waiting to see that happen. Hopefully it does. But until then, I do hope that this has been informative for you listening. Again, you are absolutely welcome to disagree with us, hopefully in a politeful manner. Thanks for all that watched and followed today. Stoic, again, thanks for the follow. I just saw that popped up. Appreciate you all chiming in, and thank you all for watching. Stay tuned that next week we're going to have more Tonic Accord. So if you want to watch our recorded episodes, go on YouTube, look up Tonic Accord, or you can hit the audio at Podbean. We have years and years of content up there now. And you can go back and look at specific things like our coverage of the Khashoggi killing back when that happened. What else did we mention today that we covered? Oh, the Thucydides trap. You can find out more about that political theory we mentioned today with our episodes. So thank you, everyone.
And we've also talked about Israel. And
yes.
So we are not just pro-Israel nut jobs. I think both of us have a very balanced take on Israel, and we understand it's a nuanced topic. That's my PC answer to this joker who was on here earlier.
Right. So if you want a lot of more nuanced topics, then definitely look us up, the Tonic Accord. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you see